serve as an introduction to the study of the Dawnbreakers. And when it was decided to have this course, I thought of Amatul Bahar Ruhiyyuh Khanum, both because over the years I had heard that she had originally given classes on the Dawnbreakers in her youth, and that then she also confirmed that in South America in a conversation. And since I've heard even some of the friends here have said that they've been at those classes and that they were very uplifting and very stimulating. So in my mind, a class on the Dawnbreakers was associated with Amatul Bahar. And I ventured to suggest to her if she would like to join this evening with us and speak to us, that it would be a great honor for the class. And we are very pleased that she's here tonight, and she's going to address us with comments on the general subject.
Am I supposed to do something with that?
If you like, that would be lovely.
What do you want me to do with it?
What would you like to pin it to?
Well, something useful.
Did you hear back there?
What is that thing for?
It's a
Is that
recording.
for a loudspeaker?
Yes.
Well, you don't need that. If it's a tape recorder, you need it.
It's both.
That you need. You don't need any, I don't think, loudspeaker.
This has a little thing that you can hook onto something if you like.
If I were a man, my suit would button up the other way, and then it would go in the right direction. But it, is that all right, you think? Friends, I'd like to say, obviously, a number of things. One of the things I'd like to say is that this is not a study class. You think you're going to have this for 6 months on the Dawnbreakers? It would be lovely if you did. It would do them all good. But whatever it is, I'm very happy to be able to say something on the subject tonight. And I'd like to say that I have, unlike you, Hooper, who always seem to manage to find time to prepare a scholarly presentation of something, I've worked already 8 hours correcting a book and subtitles to pictures for a book that's going to be published, I hope, before convention in England, about Shoghi Effendi. It's the condensation of the Priceless Pearl, and the manuscript came, and everybody's in a hurry, to get it to the printer, and it was a mess. So I've been working very hard on that all day, and I had thought to sort of refresh my memory, but I haven't had any time to do so. But I think that the Dawnbreakers go so deep into your heart that you're not likely to forget the feeling that it conveys and the inspiration, because to me that's much more important than all the details of the Dawnbreakers. Shoghi Effendi translated that marvelous book for us. I don't know whether you realize that he paraphrased it. It is not a translation of Nabil's narrative. It is based on Nabil's narrative, but it is entirely in English, the creation of Shoghi Effendi. And it is a very, very extraordinary book, and I cannot remember. I think I quote it in my own book on the Priceless Pearl. This is one of the things I wanted to look up but didn't have time today. This Priceless Pearl, I think, quotes what I think Sir Ronald Storrs said about the Dawnbreakers, because Shoghi Effendi had a very, very small list of people that he sent his books to with his card as a compliment, a complimentary copy. And then he wrote and praised very, very highly. Have you got it there? I wish you'd read it, because it's really interesting, and I didn't have time to look at anything at all today. I sat for 8 hours correcting things.
This is the one from Denison Ross?
Yes, E. Denison Ross. It wasn't Storrs. Another thing in there is from Storrs. Stand near me so you'll be recorded.
Start with a letter or your comment here?
although such an understanding appreciation of what his work represented from such a source must have pleased and touched Shoghi Effendi, there can be no doubt that the letter which Sir E. Denison Ross, the well-known Orientalist, wrote to him from the School of Oriental Studies of the University of London was the most highly prized tribute he received. The 27th of April, 1932. My dear Shoghi Effendi, it was most kind of you to remember me and send me copies of your 2 latest works, which I am very proud to possess, especially as coming from such a quarter. The Dawnbreakers is really one of the most beautiful books I have seen for many years. The paper, printing, and illustrations are all exquisite. As for your English style, it really could not be better, and never does it read like a translation. Allow me to convey my warmest congratulations on your most successful achievement of what you set out to do when you came to Oxford, namely to attain a perfect command of our language. Apart from all this, Nabil's narrative will be of the utmost service to me in the lectures I deliver here every session on the Bab and the Baha. Trusting you are in good health, I remain yours very sincerely, E. Denison Ross, Director. This is only one of the people who appreciated the extraordinary quality of Nabil's narrative. You know, the story of the book is so interesting. I think that being obviously guided by God and longing to familiarize the Baha'is with the history of the Baha'i faith and of the heroic age of the Baha'i faith, that the Guardian sat down and worked on Nabil's narrative. Nabil's narrative covers the period of the Bab. When you come to the second part of Nabil's narrative, which covers the period of Baha'u'llah, it is incomparably inferior. The facts are there. I remind you, I can't read either, but I heard this so many times from Shoghi Effendi. The facts are there in that second part of Nabil's narrative, which has never been translated or compiled or gotten into order, so to speak, for publication. The second volume is very inferior in material and treatment to the first volume. And Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, particularly Baha'u'llah, urged Nabil to hurry up and get on with it. But it's the first part, the episode of the Bab, so to speak, that is so extraordinary and so wonderful. So the Guardian sat down, and with his incomparable thoroughness, he produced this wonderful and precious book. There will never be anything like it till the next manifestation of God comes. We have to realize that what Baha'u'llah, of course, obviously, the prophet for this dispensation, what Abdul Baha gave us, the exemplar of his teachings, the interpreter of his message and his writings, these things are immortal. They're the very fabric of our religion. And they will be with us, we hope, and pray to God word for word till the end of this dispensation. But then we come to the works of Shoghi Effendi. And don't fool yourselves that we only have had one guardian. We're only going to have in this dispensation one guardian. And what he accomplished is truly extraordinary, and his writings are absolutely unique, as unique in their way as the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha in their way. So when the Guardian sat down to translate this wonderful book, to create it, you might say, in the English language, he gave us a masterpiece, as this non-Baha'i professor has pointed out. When I heard that this wonderful book was coming, I was living in Canada. I naturally didn't know very much about it. And I got very excited over the fact that this wonderful thing, you see, was going to be given to us. And then finally the book arrived, Nabil's narrative, and it was a revelation. You see, you have everything laid on. Some of us are old Baha'is here, but not very many. None of you are my generation. In fact, whoever told you in this place that they'd heard me give a talk on the Dawnbreakers, they must be my age. Meg, yes. Meg was there at that particular session. Yes, no, she was younger than I, and she was there at that session at Llewellyn Ranch when I gave the course on the Dawnbreakers. But the point is not that. The point is that this marvelous book burst upon us almost like a bomb. You are used to things now. You have everything now. It's all laid on. You have all these books. You have a lot of books. Maybe you shouldn't have it. A lot of them perhaps are not as valuable as one could wish them to be. Concentrate on the books that are the teachings rather than on the books written by your fellow Baha'is. Those are fine. But I think that we sometimes forget that no matter what any Baha'i writes, it's nothing at all compared to the writings of the central figures of our faith and how important they are. Anyway, we didn't have things in those days. So that the gift of Nabil, that superb presentation, as Ross says, beautiful paper for all those who are interested, beautiful, clear print, large letters, scholarly and copious footnotes, and unrivaled illustrations. Shoghi Effendi sent Effie Baker, an Australian professional photographer, to Iran to photograph everything connected with the history of the Bab. And the Persian Baha'is in this room know how little there is left, how everything has been confiscated, destroyed, built over by urban development, and how little anything of what Effie Baker could take pictures of in those days remains for us to see, even presuming that we were able to go to Iran and see those things, which of course we can't, you see. So that this guidance, this brilliance of Shoghi Effendi in sending Effie, a little shrimp of an old maid, if you don't mind my saying so, rather a dried up little shrimp of an old maid, to Persia to retrace the events of the history of the Bab and take these absolutely unbelievable photographs. We owe that to him too, and it has created a book that in many ways is absolutely unique. This is the ordinary copy, but Shoghi Effendi had a deluxe edition, which were signed. Of course, they were numbered. They were bound in, they have an appearance similar to this in color. They are made on very beautiful leather, green leather, and they fit into a box so that only the title, the front of the spine of the book shows. And they are very precious, these limited editions, and this edition, of course, is very precious now too, because it's been out of print for a lot of years. But the photographs and the type and the whole thing is something that I wish you would also please think about a little, because the standard of Baha'i publications, in my estimation, is exceedingly debased today. The print is vile, the photographs are not intelligible, they're not well set up, and often the text is not particularly worth wasting one's time on. But the point is that you have this marvelous book of the Guardian. And it was so exciting when this book came to us and it sort of broke on us like a revelation. We knew very little in those days. Even my mother, you see, who was the first Baha'i in France and later the first Baha'i in Canada, and who was taught the faith by Mirza Abul Fazl, because he sent him on his way to America, to Paris, to teach my mother the faith, so that she had a pretty marvelous professor of the Baha'i religion. She was a very deep scholar of the faith, you see. But even people like my mother, we knew so little about those early days, so little about what the people were like, the events associated with the dispensation of the Bab. And then we suddenly were given this perfectly marvelous documentation. And I remember that one of the first things that my mother and I did, we were so excited over having this book, that we sat down, probably my mother wrote the letter and included me in it, and we thanked Shoghi Effendi for what he had given to us. We thought that we'd like to do that because it was such a wonderful thing. We were so excited, so thrilled, so grateful, you see. So we wrote him a letter of appreciation and thanks for this wonderful gift he had given to the Baha'is. And when I came to Haifa as a pilgrim with my mother in 1937, which now is over 51 years ago, and I've lived here over 51 years now, he gave me the deluxe edition of this book with a dedication in it. And of course I nearly passed out. I was so excited and so overwhelmed. And I forget what the dedication says, something or other in appreciation of my services, because I had been traveling in Germany and Europe for 2 years, and anyway, he decided that that's what he would put in the dedication, but of course it's an infinitely precious gift, and I can remember what that meant to me. But the thing that was difficult when we began to, when we wrote Shoghi Effendi, and thanked him for the book. Then he wrote back and he told me that I should study it and give lectures on the subject. So that's what I did, because it was sufficient for Shoghi Effendi to say he wanted something that any devoted Baha'i would immediately think, well, that's the best thing, I'll just do it, you see. And then from then on, until I came to live here and very seldom had any opportunity. I think it's the first talk on Nabil I've given for maybe 50 years, Hooper, or maybe once or twice in between times. And it's a very wonderful thing to be able to recall all of it, you see. But the whole experience of Nabil meant so much to us, and so I read it from cover to cover, obviously. And I knew then, in those days, a little Arabic, very little, because there was no Persian teacher in Montreal, and all I could do was to find an Arab merchant, Lebanese, who came and gave me maybe 5 lessons in Arabic. So I learned to read it and write it, decipher it and write it, and a few words, and that was all. That was the basis of my scholarship in the Arabic language. And then I learned Persian when I came here and married and lived here from 1937 onward. And Shoghi Effendi said, I will bear witness that all the Persian you know, you taught yourself. Nobody ever helped you. And so I just picked it up by ear, and as best I could. We never had any opportunity or time for lessons and classes and things like that. But in any case, the difficulty for me with Nabil's narrative was the extraordinary pronunciation of these transliterated words. And I think that that is very, very hard for Westerners. I think, frankly, it's very hard for anyone. I think it's very hard for people who are Persians and who are Arabic-speaking in origin to remember what a thing that says ZH or TH or a dot under an H or a dot under a T, you see, what the original letter is in Arabic. And that makes Nabil's narrative, in the beginning at least, very, very difficult. But then remember, you don't either have to write about all of this. I hope not, Hooper. If he asked you to write essays on it with correct transliteration, I wouldn't come to his class if I were you. But you don't have to go that far. And you don't have to try and memorize the names of all of these dozens and dozens and dozens of early believers and events that have all this extremely difficult transliteration. Just stick to the main effect, so to speak, the main scheme of it, the main characters, the main events, and that will in itself be the most marvelous experience for you. One can so easily lose oneself in a labyrinth of unnecessary details. You see, this Orientalist, whose letter I read to you in the beginning, praises the scholarship of Shoghi Effendi, but then that means that any scholar who knows which system of transliteration the Guardian used, and he used one chosen by Orientalists that was pretty well known at that time, which seemed to be indicated. There have been others that have been developed since, maybe better ones. Shoghi Effendi said that eventually there might be better systems of transliteration, but he had a framework. So that the moment, however complicated that word was, that you read it, you could immediately go back and convert it into the original Arabic or Persian name. And then you were on sound ground. Otherwise, you didn't know where you were at all, you see. But that doesn't mean that we, each one of us individually, have to learn all of these details of this extremely complicated system of transliteration. Remember at the Pilgrim House table, when we were talking about Nabil with Shoghi Effendi, I said that I mentioned, it's in, I think, the preface of this book, the system of Mardikil. And Shoghi Effendi said, the what, you see? I said, the system of Mardikil. So he thought, he said, can you show me where that is in Nabil? And I opened it, it was Madauhel. Well, I couldn't pronounce the transliteration, you see. And if you ask me now to spell things in transliteration, with the exception of my own name, Ruhiyya, I really can't do any of it. And I don't think that it matters that much anyway. I get by. I manage to serve the cause, you know, without being a master of transliteration. But what I'm trying to say is that you're going to find that very hard. And I wouldn't let it be a stumbling block. Just try, to the best of your ability, to get the main names correct in your pronunciation, Hujjat and Vahid, and Mullah Hussein obviously is easy, Qudus. Nobody can pronounce Qudus correctly unless they happen to come from Iraq, because Persians can't pronounce it correctly either, because it's down here. It's Qudus, down in there, you see. It never comes from up at this level at all, as some of the friends know. It only comes from down there, but we can't produce that kind of a guttural. But it's not necessary. And think of all the Baha'i children all over the world that are running around with a name that they're called Qudus. So don't worry over that too much. Just try and figure out who Qudus was and how important and precious he was in the faith. We all have our favorites. And as I read Nabil, perhaps because by nature I'm a doer, and I always want to accomplish something, my hero is Mullah Hussein. And I just love it that he cut down the man and the tree and everything else with one swish of his sword. I thought that was absolutely marvelous. And I'm very fond of swords, you see. So that was my hero. As you know, in the archives here, we have a sword which was given to the Guardian and purports to be that sword. At least it is the sword of Mullah Hussein. I doubt very much if he had half a dozen. So perhaps it is actually that sword. And in those early days when my father came here to live with us after my mother died in 1941, 41 wasn't it? 40. And I can't even remember. I know it was 40 or 41. I can't remember the day I was married, frankly. I was too nervous. But anyway, the point is that this, my father could do anything with his hands. So Shoghi Effendi said, I want you to make a mount for the sword of Mullah Hussein. And he loved doing things like that. So he went and he got some black stone and some purple velvet and some silver twisted cord, and he made 2 very beautiful mounts to support the sword of Mullah Hussein. This is in what is now, I don't know what it is now, it keeps changing around all the time. It was up till recently where Doug Martin had his office near the Greatest Holy Leafs Monument. And that was what was called the New Archives. And there was a hall there still is, and 4 rooms. And these constituted the secondary or minor archives, and the major ones were in the 3 rooms adjacent to the central part of the shrine of the Bab. So Daddy, while he was working on the sword, Shoghi Effendi said, go and bring that sword down and give it to your father, and he should make these mounts. But I got the sword in the meantime. And, it was marvelous. And I hung it over my bed, up at the top on the wall. And eventually, Daddy finished making those mounts, and then Shoghi Effendi said it had to be put back in the archive. Well, it was an awful moment. I hated giving up that sword. I just adored having it. I adored it. It was the sword of Mullah Hussein. Now, that was my hero in the Dawnbreakers, and still is. My mother's hero was Qudus, who, of course, I suppose, theologically has a higher spiritual station than Mullah Hussein. But I love him. I think he's wonderful. I'm glad he's the second moon and the little moon and the this and that and the other thing. I can't remember it all at the moment. But the point is, I'm delighted with all of that. But give me Mullah Hussein with the sword, because that's my nature. Anyway, this wonderful book was given to the Baha'is, and we struggled desperately with the transliteration and the pronunciation. This was really for us, and I think will be for a very, very long time to come for Westerners, the stumbling block in this book. Because you really get to words that they're tongue twisters, and you don't remember, not if you're a person with a memory like me, you will not remember what the TH underlined and the dot under the T and under the S and so on, unless you keep referring back to the key. You may not have it all down pat. People have different kinds of minds. But I made an effort to give lectures on this book. And I gave a course. I came away from Canada, from North America, in 1935. And the book was given to us, I think, in 1932. So that year, before I left, I was invited to give a lecture course at Ruhiyyuhkhanum Ranch, 1 week, 1 hour every day, on the Dawnbreakers, and then the same thing later on in Greenacre. And I loved it because I thought it was so exciting, so wonderful to be able to talk about these early figures of the faith, their heroism and their devotion. And I know that not in Greenacre, I don't know why, whether it's because they were New Englanders or tough or blasé or something, I couldn't make them cry. But I did make the ones at Ruhiyyuhkhanum Ranch cry. I didn't do it deliberately. But when I came to the events associated with the martyrdom of the Bab, I noticed that many people in the audience were weeping because it is so immensely moving. The whole thing is such an absolutely unbelievable book. You remember one of the footnotes says, "Happy he whose," wait a moment now, "happy he whose intoxication so hath o'ercome, that scarce he knows if at the feet of his beloved it be his turban or his head he throws. I haven't quoted it for so many years, but it's a very wonderful thing, you see. This is the standard of the true lover for the beloved, that you don't notice whether it's your head that somebody's cut off and you throw that at his feet, or whether it happens to be your turban that is thrown at the feet of the beloved. You see, this is the standard. And it's one of the very beautiful quotations that one can take from Nabil. Another thing that I remember I always have used from Nabil's narrative, I mean, except from the whole concept of Nabil and the glory of those days and the heights to which these people rose, is this thing, I think, is it Hujjat or Vahid, who says, he cites the fact that when you search for the ocean of truth, I can't quote the exact words, and you long for and look for the ocean of truth, that when you come to that ocean, it is culpable to seek further. You know, that's something people should remember. I think that intellectuals should remember that. I think the Baha'i youth that go to college and university and get higher degrees should remember it. You sought for God. You sought to understand and draw close to God through his messenger for this day. Once you have found him, don't look any further. You see, you have come to the ocean. Don't seek any further. There is no other ocean. That's the ocean that you were praying for. That's the ocean that you were looking for. It's a very, very profound spiritual truth, you see. There are many of these wonderful examples, wonderful concepts in Nabil. One of the most beautiful passages, of course, I never could get tired of reading the passage of the night of the declaration of the Bab, and having given lectures on the subject and having been so thrilled over the whole thing, it's as vivid to me as if I had been there. But you remember the Bab met Mullah Hussein outside the city limits, walking, and then he invited him to his home. And he began to talk to Mullah Hussein. Mullah Hussein was enthralled. He was a very prominent man. He was searching for the truth. He was the disciple of Sheikh Ahmad and what's the other fellow? Sayyid Kazem. And he had been looking. So when he seemed to have found what he was looking for, he had a lot of questions. And then began this discussion between Mullah Hussein and the Bab. And then you remember Mullah Hussein says, I have to get up, my companions will be waiting for me. And he wants to excuse himself. And the Bab said something which I say to myself, and I've said it all over France on this trip, because it's a very, very good thing to say. What the Bab said to him, he said, surely you must have made the hour of your return conditional upon the will of God. And I always, this word, you know, from perhaps talking on Nabil, went deep into my mind. So that when I'm tired and I'm in a meeting and I think that it was supposed to last 2 hours and I'm dying on my feet, and I thought that maybe I'd have a little rest between that and something going on later in the day, and I wish to God that I could get up and go, then I say, surely you must have made the hour of your return conditional upon the will of God. I remember these words of the Bab to Mullah Hussein. There's a great deal of that in life, you know. The more bound you are by your own will, by your own concepts, which if you are a healthy human being should be changing and growing all the time anyway, because when your mind is fixed in an unchangeable pattern, they better take you out to the cemetery, because that's a good place for you. You're almost dead at that point. But I think this is a very true thing. We have to be malleable. We have to respond to the opportunity of the moment. We have to do what we can do. And this is what Mullah Hussein had pointed out to him that night by the Bab. Then, when he goes on and describes his experiences that night, if I can remember these words, I just love them. Often I say them to myself. I find them very, very soothing. Therein, about the other world, remember, therein no toil shall reach them, and no weariness shall touch them. No vain discourse shall they hear therein, but only the cry, peace, peace. And then I think it goes on to say the beginning of their cry will be peace, and the end of their cry will be peace, you see. Well, when you're fed to the teeth with this world, it's a very nice thing to quote those words. Therein no toil shall reach them, and no weariness shall touch them, you see. It's just the opposite of every single thing that surrounds us on this planet. So that in so many places in Nabil, we are not only reading a saga of the early disciples of the manifestation of God, but we are also imbibing tremendous spiritual truths and spiritual education. Another thing from Nabil that is of so much value to us is the sifter of wheat. After all, Baha'u'llah said that nobody responded in Isfahan, which was the seat of the learned ulamas of Shia Islam, very famous scholars, very famous men, except this little sifter of wheat, who sat in the market. You can be quite sure he was illiterate. And that was his job. I don't suppose any of you have ever sifted wheat to get the stones and the tares out, but I have, because in the early days in Abdul Baha's house, we actually sifted the wheat sometimes. And he sat there and he just sifted the wheat. And then he sold it, you see. And then he was one of those who heard the call of the Bab and went and was martyred at Sheikh Tabarsi. I think that the whole events, particularly of Sheikh Tabarsi, are so moving, they are so vivid in our minds. I was asking Ali tonight, because he came and had supper with me before I came here with Violette, what was the limits? What was that thing in Nabil about the properties of the dust around Sheikh Tabarsi? Now, you can like it or not, you can believe it or not, but you can't get away from the fact that the Bab said it. He said that around Sheikh Tabarsi, I think 40 meters around it or something, the soil of Sheikh Tabarsi had a healing quality. What are you going to do about it? Very peculiar remark, isn't it? But that's what he says. That's what's in his writings, you see. That's another of these peculiar gifts, if you like, of the Kitab-i Nabil, the story of Nabil. Another of the things that I think is so wonderful is that passage which I have quoted so many times, "Mount your steeds, O heroes of God." You see, it's not a question to me of scholarship. Study it, master it, God bless you, know it better than I. Teach it, read it, write about it, comment on it, get the transliteration perfect. But that's not enough. It's something that's supposed to change your life. It's something that's supposed to challenge you, that's supposed to make you want to arise and follow in the footsteps of that extraordinary band of martyrs, the early heroes of the Babi dispensation. We've had lots of martyrs since. We've had many heroes, but we never have had, and very few religions in the history of the world have ever had anything comparable with the events that surround the declaration of the Bab, the followers of the Bab, the way they fought, because they didn't know that they shouldn't fight. They didn't understand that in this dispensation the sword had been abrogated. In Islam, under certain conditions, it was permitted, you see, but they didn't know it because they were very ignorant, didn't have any books, they didn't have anything. Most of them couldn't read or write, which I think we forget. All these marvelous dawnbreakers, with the exception of the priestly class and the people of the upper class, if you like Tahireh and others, they were totally illiterate. But they certainly died beautifully, and they certainly established this cause in the most marvelous and extraordinary way. So that I think that these are the values, these are the things in Nabil's narrative that can really open our eyes and affect our whole lives. I think one of the most touching things is the Bab in Maku. And he said his companion was 2 dogs, that he had not even a lamp. So often when the light goes off, you know, the electricity is cut off or something, or when I was traveling in Africa, and with so many huts, of course, way off in the countryside, they never had any electricity, and I had a candle. I had a kerosene lamp, but it was an awful nuisance. We only really used it for special meetings because the mantle breaks after you've lighted it. When you travel in a Land Rover, it becomes brittle, and then it cracks, and you can't keep putting a new mantle on every time because they're very expensive and hard to find. So we just were satisfied with a couple of candles. And then often I thought of the Bab that said, I don't even have a lamp. I thought of his getting up in the morning and the ice on his pitcher of water. That's not very pleasant, you know. It's all very well to read it. So often everything of this nature in our lives is always out there. It's like a television thing. We look at it. Isn't that interesting? Oh, dear, dear, dear. Just imagine. But you don't ever think what it was like. You don't think if you were there and you got up in the morning and the water was frozen solid, a little tiny bit that you had, and you had no light, and that you'd left your young wife behind in Shiraz, and that your little son had died, you see, and that nobody responded to your message, and they were beginning to murder all of your disciples. How would you feel shut up in Maku? And he was very young, the Bab, you know. They're very different personalities. These central figures of our faith are such extraordinarily different personalities. And I remember Shoghi Effendi and I sometimes would talk about these things, and he would comment that the prophets all had such very different natures. They had a human nature. They had a personality, you see. And you take Baha'u'llah, coming from the class of kings and nobles, worldly, said the throat which you have accustomed to fur and velvet, you have surrounded with an iron collar. Well, the Bab's throat wasn't surrounded with fur and velvet because he came of a different class. He was the merchant class, you see. That you find in you read Nabil and you study the family of the Bab, piety, a sort of a rigid Puritanism in their family background seems to be what always came over to me. That's not what comes over to me when I read about Baha'u'llah. My dear, a king, worldly wise, used to everything, art, literature, wealth, comfort. This was the background of Baha'u'llah. The background of the Bab was entirely different. You see, the background of Jesus Christ, how different it was from the background of Moses. How different Moses was from Buddha, who was the son of a king. You see, each one of these marvelous manifestations of God have their own personality, their own characteristics, their own background, the events of their own life. And it's all, I think, a very, very exciting and wonderful thing. But you feel this in the Bab, this mazlumiyat, as the Persians say. We have the word for it in English when they called Christ the terrible meek. This is really the equivalent of the word mazlum. Chogi Effendi told me that this is really the equivalent of the word mazlum in Persian, which is a very, very special word. And there is this meekness in the Bab, you see, and his tolerance of everything that happened to him. And he was so young, with all of these things that overpowered him, so to speak, and overpowered his followers. He was so young, so tender. So that in Nabil's narrative, you have this marvelous experience of seeing what the beginning of a religion is like authentically. Because, of course, there isn't any way that we know anything about the authentic religion of the days of Jesus Christ. You read the New Testament, you're very moved by the Gospels. The little there is about Jesus is so moving. You see him, you see. You see his personality. Read about Moses, you see his personality. But still, it's all pretty far away and lost in the mists of time, and with God knows how many different phases of sectarianism stuck to it, you see, encrusting it with all kinds of nonsense that have really very little relationship to the thing itself. Whereas we have this purity, this reality of history, because we are so near to the whole thing. I don't agree with people who take the attitude, which I'm sorry to say a great many people do nowadays, that, well, I'll give my stint, you know. I'll go out and do a couple of years, and I'll serve as a pioneer in Botswana, or I don't know, the Kalahari Desert or somewhere or other for a short period, as if this was a very gracious act of yours to give God a couple of years of your life. Well, that's not the thing that made the Baha'i faith as famous as it is and will always be. They gave a lot more than 6 months or a couple of years. I'm not talking about your service here. Please don't confuse what I'm saying now with a longer period of service at the World Center, because the House of Justice knows perfectly well how to manage what it wants at its World Center. I'm talking about teaching the faith to the masses all over the world. And I think there you have to go back to the examples that you find in Nabil's narrative, and many, many examples since that. I'm trying to say that the period has not passed. It's awfully hard to do anything for the faith on the level, let us say, of the Dawnbreakers today. Because our civilization, God help us, our horrible, as Shoghi Effendi said, cancerous materialism is spreading into the jungles and the deserts and the mountains of the whole world. And wherever it goes, it carries the breath of death. It is a poison. So if you want to carry the breath of life to the people, then you have to have something of the spirit and understanding that the Dawnbreakers had, that you can carry to the people and touch their hearts and touch their lives. And I think that this is one of the things that the Dawnbreakers does. It makes you understand that these extraordinary spiritual values are the rock foundation of the cause of God. Of course, that was the heroic age. It's gone. It's not going to come back. But that doesn't mean that some of the spirit that animated Baha'is in the heroic age and some of the things that they accomplished cannot be carried out by the disciples of Baha'u'llah, who are, of course, automatically the disciples of the Bab too, in a similar type of service. I've been talking for 3/4 of an hour, a little bit more, and I wondered whether perhaps people would like to ask some questions. If I can't answer them,
I'm sure that there's aspects of the scene if they get brave and
Well, they're not going to do much good if they're such cowards they can't ask for me a question.
It's not a question, but I just wanted to state that when you were talking about the Bob and Mullah Hussein's meeting, I don't know if all the friends know that it's in the book Prescriptions for Living, that RuhiyyuhKhanum puts it in, and that is the most beautiful story. It's when you tell it in that book.
I'd forgotten I put it in it. It's wonderful.
They should read it because then they will really feel what you're talking about.
I'd like to add one more vignette of this Dawnbreakers. I used to be asked, we were a very small community in Montreal, and I was already encouraged by my mother and old Baha'is to talk on the faith. And because of that, I used to be asked usually to speak on the anniversary of the declaration of the Bab, and often on the anniversary of the martyrdom of the Bab. And I can remember giving a talk to an audience that were very small, I mean, like half of this room, most of them Baha'is and just a few non-Baha'is, and a very dear Catholic friend of ours. And I spoke about the martyrdom of the Bab, you see, and the events associated with it. And he was sitting in the front row, and when it tells about the whole events, you see, and then the dust storm and all of these things, this man put his hand like this over his face. And I knew that he had understood the reality of the whole thing and of the faith at that moment. But you know that man still never became a Baha'i. And I lost track of him during the war. When I went back to Canada, he was a Frenchman, and I tried so hard to find him. Nobody had any record of him. All they knew was that the war had come, and they hadn't seen André Verrier since then. And years later, I think about 5 years ago, I got a letter from him. And he said, "Mary, do you remember me? I'm André Verrier." And then he told me all about his years in the French underground. He had 7 sisters that were nuns. And that shows what a devout Catholic family they were. And he was, of course, obviously not a priest. And he said that he had been in the underground, he had met his wife, they had married, they had children. He told me all about his life. And I wrote back how happy I was to hear from him and told him all about my life. And I sent him this book, The Priceless Pearl, in French. Now, mind you, this was 40 years. We had known each other 40 years since I gave that talk, and he knew perfectly well what was the truth at that moment. And he wrote back and he said, "You know, Mary, I think this is very wonderful, and thank you for sending me the book, but I shall remain a Christian until I die." You know, it's so strange. It makes you so sad to see this what is it, this impermeability of people. They don't seem to be able to make this effort to accept the faith of Baha'u'llah, to enter the faith of Baha'u'llah. So how any of us could ever be grateful enough to God that He has accepted us and let us become Baha'is, and that we pray that we will be firm Baha'is till the end of our life, it's a tremendous thing. Because look at what other people have. They really have nothing. They're destitute. But what I'm getting at is that the events of Naville, as you said, they have such an effect. I have no information. Maybe the members of the House have it. I have no information. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to give some thoughts on the events in Iran during the last 8 or 9 years in the light of the Dawnbreakers?
Well, I think that to me it's perfectly obvious. What were the Dawnbreakers? They were God intoxicated. But I think the main thing is that something happened. You see, we're all so sophisticated. I'm sophisticated, you're sophisticated. We come of a very sophisticated group and a very sophisticated period in history. So it's hard for us to imagine that we are other than what we are, you see. But I think that there was this unidirectional, flaming conviction of the divine truth. You see, people believed in eternity. They don't believe in eternity now. But people believed in eternity. Of course, there's still lots of people that do. But I think most people nowadays, they may render lip service to a life after death, but they really don't believe in it at all. They're not sure it's there, and probably they don't even believe that it is there. One way or another, they think, well, question mark, probably isn't there anyway. So that you don't have that keenness, that devotion. But what has been so extraordinary for us Baha'is, I'm sure you and I and all of us, is that these Persian Baha'is have succeeded in having that same unidirectional attachment to Baha'u'llah, you see. Because that's really what it is, isn't it? If you boil it all down, what it amounts to is that they're not going to give up Baha'u'llah. They are beaten. Now we know many of the prisoners in the prisons are tortured, the Baha'is, have been brutally tortured. They can say one word and be free. Some of them have been in prison for God knows how long. Others have died, as you know. But what it amounts to is that they have focused themselves on Baha'u'llah. And they are absolutely not going to get unfocused, no matter what happens. You kill them, you imprison them, you beat them. They stick to Baha'u'llah, and I suppose, just like the early Dawnbreakers, that if you rise to these heights, then you get onto another level of consciousness, and you receive a degree of divine assistance and blessings that you might not get in any other way, you see. I can only presume that that is what happens to them. And I think that in our lives we have to realize that there are levels, you see. All right? You are walking. You get in a car, you go faster. Different medium. We're still the same medium. You're on the ground. But a different instrument, a different way of doing it. Then you go to an airplane. You get on the airport and you taxi across the airfield. And you're just like a giant bus. If you were in a small plane, you only go up perhaps, 8,000 feet? If you go up to the stratosphere, you're a big plane, you see. Other things have other values. The stratosphere is quite different. Its speed, the things governing the plane up there, the stresses on it. Every single thing in the stratosphere is tremendously different from anything down here on the airfield when you're bumping along like a bus, you see. So that everything has its levels. And I think that we, although we can't go back to being the Dawnbreakers, because that's a period in religious history. That's the dawn of the religion. It dawned now. Wait, it's up in the zenith. The star, the sun of Baha'u'llah, is up there now. Can't make it dawn all over again. It's got up there. So it's not the same thing. But there are still these wonderful possibilities of service, of degrees of service, of degrees of attachment, of degrees of awareness. All you have to do is to read the writings, and you find it over and over and over again in the gleanings and in the prayers and in the hidden words, you see, calling upon us to rise to this spiritual reality. Well, I suppose that this is the reality that the Persian Baha'is have arisen to, or wakened up to, whatever you want to call it, and has enabled them to follow in the footsteps of the martyrs of the past.
question?
I'm interested to know what advice you have for people who would like to teach courses on the Dawnbreakers.
You know, I'm not a very good person to ask that question of, because by nature I'm a simplifier. I'm a doer and a simplifier. So I just read Nabil, and to the best of my ability tried to master the main names and the main events, and I adored it, and I steeped myself in it, and then I got up and talked about it, you see. And I just did the best I could, but there's always levels. You can go into a whole immense course on transliteration if you want to. You see, there's different levels of doing it. I think, to me, the main thing to do with the Dawnbreakers is sit down and struggle with the terminology, because that is very, very difficult in the beginning. At least it was for me. Then gradually, when I got more used to the words, if I were you, I'd just take the words that are transliterated, that are particularly difficult, and in your notes, put them down in phonetically, so that you can remember them and pronounce them. Because after all, the purpose of it is to do something with it, you see. Now, other people want to go into all the deciphering of these names and all the details of the transliteration. They're free. But you want to do something with it, try and capture the spirit of it, and try and pass on the picture of that spirit. Look at Zainab. She was another of my heroines. As I said, I like weapons, I like guns, I don't like killing, but I did always get quite interested in that type of heroism. And she took her hair and bound the cannon up. Well, that's fine as far as I'm concerned. That's beautiful. I loved her for that. I could just see her cut her long, beautiful black locks and tie up the cannon that had split. And I thought that was thrilling. Women's lib.
In your estimation, what could possibly be the highest duty or service to the Baha'i faith now in teaching? Would it be to go out and get an education and then pioneer? Or would it be to immediately go out and serve?
I'm the wrong number. I can't, perhaps because I'm a coward, I don't know. I wish Masood was here, because he never is a coward as far as answering that question goes. But I never have the nerve to tell young people, chuck your education and go out and serve. I don't feel that I should interfere to that degree in their lives. But I think, to me, the most important thing in the world is pioneering. And I think that people ask me, well, RuhiyyuhKhanum, what do you go on and on the subject of pioneering for? Because that's the hardest thing, you see. We're not going to have any trouble getting young Baha'is to go to summer schools and winter schools and skiing schools and dancing schools and all the rest of it. They'll have a lovely time, and God bless them, they're wonderful. So there's no problem there, and there's not much problem in their studying, and then they go ahead and they know more, and they correlate it to the teachings, and they teach their active and informed young Baha'is. That's fine too. But the hard thing is those who are willing to give up everything and go out and pioneer. You see, Hooper and Marilyn and Violette, and I can't see everybody in this room, but there are many, many of the Baha'is here who have pioneered, and they know what they are talking about. They have done it, you see, in their private lives. And that's a different level of service, and I think that it is as much needed today as it was needed in the 50s when Shoghi Effendi inaugurated the World Crusade. But it's so much harder to do that now for 100 different reasons. But I still think that surely that door of service must still be open. There are places that need pioneers. There are places that need sacrifice. Think of going and teaching in a lot of very unfavorable climates in village schools. After all, we Baha'is have a lot of schools all over the world. But there isn't much, there's no spirit of adventure in your generation, if you excuse my saying so. And I don't know why. I can't understand it. I'm 77, and the mere thought of going to a village in the Himalayas or going to a village in the desert or African jungle or somewhere, it thrills me. I'm dying to go there. Simply dying to go there. When we went on this trip to Thailand last year after the dedication of the temple in Delhi, and it was very nice, and we met the Baha'is north, south, east, and west, and then eventually we got to some Baha'i villages. My God, to sit on the floor again with villagers that were Baha'i, oh, you don't know the joy. Not a hotel, not a school, not a fussy meeting, not an official, just an ordinary farmer, an ordinary fisherman. You sit on the floor with him and talk about him, with him and his family about the faith. I don't know. This is my idea of all I could ask for in the world if I only had the opportunity and the freedom to do it. But unfortunately, I have a few other things that I've got to do. I can't devote all my time to that. But I don't understand it. People don't want to do that anymore. There's no challenge in it for them. And why, I don't know. But I think, as I say, these are intensely personal issues. I think everybody has to judge for himself and herself what he feels he wants to do for the cause and how he's going to do it. But for heaven's sake, do something for it, you see. In the name of higher studies and higher education, and if don't fool yourself on the money part. How many Baha'is I have heard in my life, and lots of us have heard it too, that they're going to go and become wealthy. Have you ever heard that one? You know, look at the controller looking at me. He's heard it. They're going to go and become wealthy, you see. Then think of the money they can give to the Baha'i faith. Well, I'm sorry if they ever get wealthy, they don't give any money to the Baha'i faith because they've gotten so interested in being wealthy and making more money that it's almost unheard of that they should give anything to the Baha'i faith, you see. One has to, life is a dangerous game. Life isn't a safe business at all. Life's a very dangerous game. But we have to do our best.
I think we don't want to tire RuhiyyuhKhanum out in courtesy to answer questions, but if there aren't any more questions, we can go to the meeting now. First, we want to, I think, thank RuhiyyuhKhanum very much for coming and sharing these intimate views and feelings of her heart and the reminiscence of the first courses that she gave on the Dawnbreakers. Thank you very much.